this village, the river does not forgive mistakes. Once it pulls you in, it keeps you. But that morning, a poor village girl did something no one else dared to do. She thought she was saving a stranger. She had no idea she was touching a destiny worth billions. And what he did afterward changed her life in a way money alone never could. The Clearwater River runs through Millbrook like a scar that never healed. It's beautiful in photographs, the kind of place tourists stop to take pictures on their way to somewhere better. But the people who live here know the truth. The river has claimed 17 lives in the past 20 years. Fishermen, children who wandered too close, a newlywed couple on their anniversary. The current beneath that calm surface moves like a predator, patient and relentless. There's an unwritten rule in Millbrook, passed down through generations like a curse nobody wants to break. If the river takes someone, you let it. You don't fight water that's already made up its mind. You say a prayer, you look away, and you survive. That's how people here have learned to live, by knowing when to turn their backs. Amara Thompson grew up hearing those stories. Her grandmother told them on cold nights when the wind made the river sound hungry. Amara was 7 when her parents died. Not in the river, but in a car accident on Route 9. The kind of tragedy that's over in seconds but echoes for decades. Her grandmother, Margaret, took her in without question, even though money was already tight and her arthritis was getting worse every winter. They lived in a 2-room house at the edge of the village, the kind of place where you could hear rain through the roof and feel wind through the walls. Amara never finished high school. She had to drop out at 16 to help with bills. Selling firewood she collected herself and fish she caught in the shallow parts of the river, the parts that hadn't killed anyone yet. People in Millbrook knew her face but rarely said her name. She was the quiet girl who worked hard, kept her head down, and never asked for anything, invisible in the way poor people often are. But Amara had something most people didn't. She had her grandmother's voice in her head, steady and sure, even when everything else felt uncertain. Margaret used to say, "When you have nothing, your character is all you own." Amara believed that. She had to. It was the only thing that made waking up every morning feel like it meant something. Now, at 23, she still lived in that same house, still sold firewood and fish, still watched wealthier families drive past her on their way to jobs she'd never have. But she'd never let bitterness harden her. That was the thing about Amara. She'd learned early that cruelty was easy, that turning away was easier. Kindness, real kindness, took strength. And on the morning of June 14th, that strength would be tested in a way she never imagined. It was a Tuesday, and the heat was the kind that made the air shimmer and your clothes stick to your skin before noon. Amara had been at the river since dawn, checking the small traps she'd set the night before. She caught 3 catfish, nothing impressive, but enough to sell at the market later. She was walking back along the narrow dirt path, her basket balanced on her hip, when she heard it. Screaming. Not the playful kind, not kids messing around in the water. This was different. This was terror. Amara froze. Her first instinct, the one everyone in Millbrook learned, was to keep walking. The river takes what it takes. But her feet wouldn't move. She turned toward the sound, her heart already pounding, and saw him. A man, maybe 40, thrashing in the middle of the river about 30 feet from the bank. He was wearing a white button-down shirt and dark slacks, completely wrong for the terrain, like he'd been dropped there from another world. His head went under, came back up, went under again. Amara's eyes scanned the area. There were people nearby, at least a dozen. Old Mr. Peters, who fished every morning. 2 women from the church, a couple of teenagers on bikes. They were all watching, nobody moved. Mr. Peters actually turned his back and started reeling in his line. One of the women made the sign of the cross and looked down. The teenagers just stared, frozen, like they were watching a movie they couldn't pause. Amara felt her chest tighten. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the 17 people the river had taken. She thought about walking away. Then she saw the stick. It was leaning against a tree near her basket, a long, sturdy branch she'd meant to take home for firewood. Without thinking, she dropped her basket and grabbed it. The fish spilled out onto the dirt. She didn't care. Amara ran to the edge of the water, her bare feet slipping on the wet rocks. The man's head went under again. She could see his arms flailing, weaker now. She dropped to her knees, then to her stomach, the mud soaking through her shirt. She stretched the stick out as far as she could, her shoulders screaming in protest. "Come on," she thought. "Please." The man surfaced one more time, coughing, choking. His eyes found hers. She saw the fear in them, the recognition that this might be his last moment. "Grab it," she shouted. "Grab the stick." He reached, missed, went under, came back up, reached again. This time, his fingers wrapped around the wood. Amara pulled. God, she pulled. Her arms felt like they were tearing, her body sliding forward on the slick mud. She dug her feet into the ground, using every ounce of strength she had. The current fought her, trying to rip him away. But she held on. Slowly, agonizingly, she dragged him closer. 1 foot, 2 feet. She could hear him gasping now, coughing up water. Someone finally ran over to help, one of the teenagers, and together they hauled the man onto the bank. He collapsed onto the mud, chest heaving, water pouring from his nose and mouth. He was alive. Amara sat back, her whole body shaking, her hands raw and bleeding from the rough bark. She looked around at the people who had watched. Their faces were blank, uncomfortable, ashamed, maybe, but not enough to say anything. Mr. Peters had already left. The women from the church whispered to each other and walked away. The teenager who helped mumbled something and got back on his bike. The man coughed again, rolled onto his side. He looked up at Amara, his eyes unfocused but grateful. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, broken. "Thank you." Before she could respond, before she could even ask if he was okay, she heard the sound of an engine. A black SUV appeared at the top of the hill, moving fast, too fast for the dirt road. It stopped abruptly, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They moved with precision, like soldiers or bodyguards. They didn't ask questions. They didn't thank her. They lifted the man to his feet, supporting him on both sides, and guided him toward the vehicle. Amara stood there, confused, covered in mud and river water, watching as they loaded him into the back seat. One of the men glanced at her just for a second, his expression unreadable. Then they were gone. The SUV disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but dust and tire tracks. Amara stood alone by the river, her basket overturned, her fish scattered in the dirt, her hands still trembling. She had no idea who that man was. She had no idea what she'd just done, and she had no idea that her life had just changed forever. By that evening, the whole village knew. News in Millbrook traveled faster than the river current, especially when it was strange, especially when it involved Amara, the girl who saved the drowning man, the girl who broke the rule. People whispered. They always whispered. Some said she was brave. Most said she was foolish. A few, the ones who'd watched and done nothing, said she was showing off, trying to be a hero. Amara heard it all. She walked through the market the next day, and conversation stopped when she passed. Eyes followed her. Mrs. Callahan, who ran the vegetable stand, pulled her aside and said, "You should have let the river have him, child. You don't know what you've invited." Amara didn't respond. What could she say? She went home that night and told her grandmother everything. Margaret listened quietly, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her expression soft. "You did the right thing," Margaret said finally. Her voice was steady, certain. "Don't let fear teach you cruelty." Amara nodded, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Nothing happened. No black SUV returned. No men in suits came looking for her. The man she saved, whoever he was, had vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared. Life went back to normal. Amara sold her firewood and fish. She repaired the leak in the roof. She helped her grandmother with the garden. But something had shifted. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the terror in his eyes, about the way everyone had turned away, about the thank you he'd whispered before he was taken. She wondered if he even remembered her. She wondered if he was okay. She wondered if saving him had mattered at all. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, think about this for a moment. If you were Amara, standing by that river, watching everyone else turn away, would you have grabbed that stick? Would you have risked everything for a complete stranger? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know what you would have done in that moment. The doubt crept in slowly, the way cold seeps into a house with thin walls. Maybe Mrs. Callahan was right. Maybe she should have walked away. Maybe kindness was just another word for foolishness when you were poor and nobody cared. 3 weeks after the incident, Amara was in the market again, selling the last of her firewood, when she heard the engines. At first, she thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. The sound grew louder, closer, a low rumble that made people stop and turn. Then she saw them. 3 black SUVs, moving slowly down Main Street, completely out of place in a village where most people drove pickup trucks or walked. The vehicles stopped in front of the market. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out, the same type who'd taken the drowning man. But this time, they weren't in a hurry. They were calm, deliberate, and they were looking directly at Amara. Her stomach dropped. Her first thought was that she'd done something wrong, that somehow saving that man had brought trouble, just like people said it would. One of the men approached her, his expression neutral. "Are you Amara Thompson?" he asked. His voice was polite but firm. She nodded, unable to speak. He gestured toward the lead SUV. "Someone would like to speak with you." Amara glanced around. The market had gone silent. Everyone was watching. She thought about running. She thought about saying no. But something in the man's tone told her this wasn't a request. She followed him to the vehicle. The back door opened, and there he was, the man from the river. But he looked different now. Clean, composed, powerful. He wore an expensive suit, his hair neatly combed, his presence commanding in a way that made the small village feel even smaller. He smiled when he saw her, and it was genuine, warm. "Amara," he said, "please, sit." She climbed into the SUV, her hands shaking, her mind racing. The door closed behind her, and for the first time since that morning by the river, she was face to face with the stranger she'd saved. And she had no idea what came next. His name was Jonathan Pierce. He told her that in the first minute, sitting across from her in the back of that SUV, his voice calm and measured, like he was used to people, listening when he spoke. Amara had never heard the name before. It meant nothing to her. But the way he said it, the way the men in suits stood a little straighter when he was near, told her it meant something to someone. Jonathan explained that he was a businessman, though he didn't say what kind. He'd been visiting the area for a private land assessment, something to do with development or investment, details that went over Amara's head. He'd gone for a walk alone that morning, something his security team advised against, and misjudged the river's edge. The rocks were wet. He slipped, and the current did the rest. "I was conscious for maybe 90 seconds after I went under," Jonathan said. His eyes were steady, serious. "I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. Not in a boardroom or a hospital, in a river in the middle of nowhere, and I remember seeing people on the shore. I reached out. I tried to scream, but nobody moved. Nobody even tried." Amara looked down at her. Hands. She didn't know what to say. "But you did," Jonathan continued. "You didn't know me. You had no reason to risk yourself, and you did it anyway." He paused, leaning forward slightly. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Amara thought about lying, about giving some noble answer that sounded better than the truth. But she'd never been good at lying. "Because I would want someone to help me," she said quietly. "That's all. If it were me in that water, I'd want someone to try, even if it was dangerous. Even if nobody else did. I'd want someone to care." Jonathan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, like she'd just confirmed something he already suspected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, medical reports, things Amara didn't fully understand. But she caught enough. Hypothermia, water in the lungs, cardiac stress. "The doctor said if I'd been in the water another 3 minutes, I wouldn't have made it," Jonathan said. "You didn't just help me, Amara. You saved my life." She didn't know what to say to that. She'd never thought of it that way. She'd just done what felt right in the moment. Jonathan closed the folder and set it aside. "I've spent the last 3 weeks recovering," he said, "and thinking. About that morning, about the people who watched, about you. I asked myself, what kind of person risks everything for a stranger? What kind of place raises someone like that?" He gestured toward the window, toward the village beyond. "And then I learned about Millbrook, about the river, about the 17 people it's taken, about the rule. That's when I understood. You didn't just break a rule, Amara. You broke a cycle." Amara felt her throat tighten. She didn't feel brave. She felt tired and poor and confused about why this man was sitting here talking to her like she'd done something extraordinary, when all she'd done was what anyone should do. Jonathan seemed to sense her discomfort. He leaned back, his expression softening. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable," he said. "I'm here because I believe actions have consequences. Good ones, when they're rooted in the right intentions. And I want to make sure your action that day leads to something meaningful. Not just for you. For this whole village." Amara looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jonathan smiled. "I mean, I'm not just going to write you a check and disappear, Amara. I'm going to invest in this place, in the people here, in the future that should have been built a long time ago. And I'm starting with you." Over the next 20 minutes, Jonathan laid out his plan. It wasn't a handout. It wasn't charity. It was a partnership. He'd researched Millbrook's needs, spoken with local officials, and identified the gaps that kept the village struggling. No school past 8th grade, meaning kids had to travel 40 minutes to the nearest high school or drop out. No medical clinic, meaning emergencies required an hour-long drive to the county hospital. No community center, no job training programs, no infrastructure to support growth. Jonathan wanted to change that. He was funding the construction of a regional high school in Millbrook. It would serve not just the village, but the surrounding areas, providing education to hundreds of students who otherwise had none. He was building a medical clinic near the river, staffed with doctors and equipped to handle emergencies. And he was establishing a scholarship fund, providing full financial support for students who wanted to pursue college or vocational training. "But here's the part that matters most," Jonathan said, looking directly at Amara. "I don't want this to be something I do and walk away from. I want it to be led by someone from here, someone who understands this community, someone people trust. I want you to be that person, Amara." Amara blinked. "What?" Jonathan smiled. "I'm offering you a position. Community coordinator. You'll oversee the scholarship program, work with families, help identify students who need support. You'll be trained, compensated fairly, and given the resources to make real decisions. This isn't a favor. It's a job. And I think you're the right person for it." Amara couldn't breathe. A job. A real job. Not selling firewood, not scraping by. A future. "You don't have to answer now," Jonathan said gently. "Take your time, think about it. But I want you to know, this is happening because of you, not in spite of you. Because of you." The meeting ended shortly after. Jonathan gave her his contact information, assured her his team would follow up, and told her to reach out if she had any questions. Amara stepped out of the SUV in a daze, her legs shaky, her mind spinning. The village was still watching, but this time the whispers felt different, less judgmental, more curious. Amara walked home slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She thought about the river, about the man she'd saved, about the life she'd been living and the life she might be able to live. And for the first time in years, she'd let herself hope. 4 months later, the high school's foundation was laid. The construction site sat on the north end of Millbrook, a plot of land that had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Now it was alive with workers, machinery, and purpose. Amara visited the site once a week, walking through the half-built classrooms, imagining the students who would one day fill them. She'd accepted Jonathan's offer. It took her 3 days to decide, 3 days of lying awake at night wondering if she was capable, if she deserved it, if this was real. Her grandmother had been the one to push her over the edge. "Take it," Margaret said firmly. "You've spent your whole life giving. Let someone give back." So Amara said yes, and her life changed overnight. She was enrolled in an online program for nonprofit management, studying in the evenings after long days of meeting with families, reviewing scholarship applications, and coordinating with Jonathan's team. It was hard. It was overwhelming, but it was hers. The medical clinic opened first, 6 months after that day by the river. It was small but fully equipped, with 2 doctors, 3 nurses, and a 24-hour emergency line. The opening ceremony drew nearly the entire village. Amara stood near the back, watching as Jonathan cut the ribbon, watching as people clapped and cheered. She thought about the 17 people the river had taken. She thought about how many of them might have survived if this clinic had existed. She thought about her parents, about the car accident that took them, about how, maybe, just maybe, things could have been different. The high school opened a year later. It was beautiful, modern, with bright classrooms and a library that smelled like new books. On the first day, 212 students walked through its doors. Kids from Millbrook and the surrounding villages, kids who would have had to drop out or travel hours every day. Now they had a chance. Amara stood at the entrance that morning, greeting students, shaking hands with parents, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. If you're still with this story, type "I'm still here" in the comments. I read every comment, and if this story is touching your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. But the most meaningful moment came 2 years after the river. Amara was in her office at the community center, a small building Jonathan had funded as a base for the scholarship program. She was reviewing applications when her assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," the assistant said. Amara looked up. A girl stood in the doorway, maybe 16, wearing a nervous smile. Her name was Clara, and she was from a family even poorer than Amara's had been. Clara had applied for a scholarship 3 months ago, hoping to study nursing. Amara had approved it herself. "I just wanted to say thank you," Clara said quietly. "I didn't think anyone would care. I didn't think I'd ever get a chance like this." Amara felt her throat tighten. She stood and walked around the desk, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "You earned it," Amara said, "and you're going to do amazing things." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. Amara sat back down, staring at the stack of applications on her desk. 50 more students waiting for answers. 50 more chances to change a life. She thought about Jonathan, about the river, about the stick she'd grabbed without thinking. She thought about how one small choice, one moment of courage, had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. And she realized something. Jonathan hadn't just given her a job. He'd given her purpose. He'd shown her that kindness wasn't weakness, that helping someone, even when it was hard, even when nobody else would, mattered. Not because of what you got in return, but because of what it created. A chance, a future, a world where people didn't turn away. 3 years after the river, Millbrook had changed. The school was thriving. The clinic had saved dozens of lives. The scholarship program had sent 42 students to college. And Amara, the quiet girl who used to sell firewood and fish, was now a leader. Someone people looked up to. Someone who proved that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. She still lived in the same house with her grandmother. She still walked by the river every morning. But now, when she looked at the water, she didn't see a curse. She saw a turning point. The place where everything changed. Jonathan Pierce visited Millbrook once a year after that. Not for publicity, not for recognition. Just to see the impact, to meet the students, to walk through the clinic, to sit with Amara and talk about what came next. On his 4th visit, they stood together by the river, the same spot where she'd pulled him from the water. The current moved steadily, indifferent and eternal. "You know," Jonathan said, looking out at the water, "I've built companies. I've closed billion-dollar deals. I've had my name on buildings and in headlines. But nothing I've ever done has mattered as much as this." Amara looked at him, surprised. "Why?" she asked. "Because this wasn't about me," Jonathan said. "It was about what you showed me. That there are still people in this world who act with pure intention, who help because it's right, not because it benefits them. You reminded me what wealth is really for. Not to hoard, not to impress, but to multiply kindness. To turn one act of courage into 100 opportunities." They stood in silence for a moment, the river rushing past them. "Do you ever regret it?" Jonathan asked. "Helping me that day?" Amara thought about it. She thought about the whispers, the fear, the uncertainty. She thought about her old life, the one where she struggled every day but never had to carry the weight of responsibility. And then she thought about Clara, about the other students, about the clinic, about her grandmother's smile when she said, "I'm proud of you, child." "No," Amara said. "I don't regret it." "Good," Jonathan said, "because I don't either." As the sun set over Millbrook, the river glowed orange and gold. Children played near the bank, their laughter echoing across the water. Families walked past the clinic, the school, the community center, and Amara stood there, watching it all, feeling the weight of what one choice had created. She thought about the people who had turned away that day. She didn't blame them. Fear was powerful. Survival was instinct. But so was compassion. And sometimes, just sometimes, compassion was stronger. The river still flows through Millbrook. It still carries its history, its losses, its 17 names that will never be forgotten. But it no longer defines the village. It no longer teaches people to look away. Because one girl chose to reach out. One man chose to reach back, and together they proved that the smallest act of kindness can shift the course of a life, a community, a future. So here's my final question for you. If you were standing on that riverbank right now, watching someone struggle, knowing everyone else had already turned away, would you be the one to reach out? Would you grab that stick? Comment below and tell me honestly. Would you be Amara? And if you believe one small act can echo across a lifetime, subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that remind us what it means to be truly human. Thank you for watching. And remember, somewhere right now, someone needs you to be their Amara.